Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. It's Tuesday, the 9th of January, checks notes. My name is Brian Liddy. I'm joined this evening by Stewart Kerr Brown. Stewart, welcome. I think this is your first time on Broadcast in Scotland, is that right?
It is, yes. I've last minute stand in for a friend and colleague of mine, Tom Ullathorne, but happy to be here and thanks for inviting me.
Oh, not at all. It's great to have you. I'm really looking forward to finding out what you think about tonight's items. But just for the viewers at home, so, Stuart, you're an activist based with Yes West Lothian. You've produced that group's short films on Brexit, which are very well received online, high production values, and you're also a designer who creates promotional videos, including for the National's recent Lights On. So that sounds great.
I've got. I think that the Yes movement needs to use every single bit of talent that it's got, and I've just been blessed with them, and then so happy to do so. Although I must say that the Brexit videos were produced for Time for Scotland as well, not for Yes West
Oh,
Lothian.
right. I'm
So
sorry. That's my mistake. That's my mistake.
no, it's not your. It's
No, it
not a
is.
problem.
Thanks for picking me up on that. So I'll move on to our first item of this evening, which is again predictably the Ukraine update day 685. Russia targeted Ukraine with dozens of missiles, killing at least 4 civilians early on Monday, Ukrainian authorities said. 2 people were killed in the western Kremlinsky region, local officials said. In Kryvyi Rih, a 62-year-old was reported to have been killed. Apologies for my mispronunciation as usual there. Elsewhere, the governor of Kharkiv region said a 63-year-old woman was killed in a strike on a town south of Kharkiv. Ukrainian forces destroyed 18 out of 51 missiles launched during the wave of Russian airstrikes on Monday, Ukraine's Air Force said. Ukraine's draft mobilisation law will not constrict women or introduce a lottery, according to Yehor Chernev, Deputy Chairman of Parliament's Defence Committee, which is due to consider the law on Tuesday. Ukraine has exported 15 million tonnes of cargo through its Black Sea shipping corridor, including 10 million tonnes of agricultural goods, the Deputy Prime Minister for Restoration, Alexander Kubrakov, has said. Indiscriminately striking civilians is a war crime because it violates international humanitarian law, Pope Francis was quoted as saying in a speech referencing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelensky, said that Russia has left people homeless through its attacks on Ukraine. A reality of war, she says, can only be changed by weapons. Stuart, that was one of the shorter updates that we've usually had, but was there anything in there that caught your eye, or is there anything that you'd like to say about the war in Ukraine?
I suppose it's more a general point on the fact that we've got another war and we don't seem to be learning from them. Yet another megalomaniac or authoritarian figure has decided to, for their own personal reasons, you know, deflect from their troubles at home. So we end up, back where we are now. I mean, I kind of grew up at the end of the Vietnam War, and I've read a bit on it, and visited Vietnam. I just find it just really sad that we've ended up again back in the same kind of situation. When are we going to learn? More to the point.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, and I'm beginning to wonder, how many days, we do these daily reports, and it's now has well over 600. I just wonder how much higher is it going to have to go before we see a resolution. But I'll move on to the next item, which is Israel and the latest from Gaza. A total of 23,210 Palestinians have been killed and 59,167 have been wounded in Israeli strikes on Gaza since the 7th of October, the Gaza Health Ministry said in a statement. About 126 Palestinians were killed and 241 were wounded in the previous 24 hours. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, has confirmed it is investigating potential crimes against journalists since the outbreak of war between Israel and Hamas. According to Reporters Without Borders, or RSF, the media advocacy group has filed 2 complaints with the ICC alleging war crimes over the deaths of journalists trying to cover the conflict. Hezbollah has launched explosive drones at a key Israeli command base, declaring the attack part of its response to recent high-level Israeli assassinations in Lebanon. Hezbollah announced it launched a number of explosive attack drones at the Israeli Northern Military Command in Safed, the first time it has targeted the site. An Israeli army spokesperson said there had been no damage or casualties. Shortly afterwards, Israel killed 2 more Hezbollah members, including one at the funeral of a senior commander in the group's elite Radwan force who had been killed the day before. The escalating violence came as the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, tours the Middle East in an attempt to prevent the war between Israel and Hamas from spreading regionally. Hezbollah Deputy Leader Naim Qassem said in a televised speech today that his group did not want to expand the war from Lebanon, but if Israel expands, the response is inevitable to the maximum extent required to deter Israel. Qassem added that Israel's wave of targeted killings cannot lead to a phase of retreat, but rather to a push forward for the resistance. Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, told a senior UN official on Tuesday that his country was ready for talks on long-term stability with Israel. Israel's President, Isaac Herzog, said today that there is nothing more atrocious and preposterous than the lawsuit filed by the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocidal actions against Palestinians in the Gaza war. Israel's military has said it has expanded its ground operation in the city of Khan Yunis inside the Gaza Strip. The IDF claims that dozens of terrorists were killed and large quantities of weapons and underground terror tunnel shafts were located. The claims have not yet been independently verified. The Israeli military has said 9 more soldiers had been killed in Gaza, bringing its total war losses there to 187. Earlier on Tuesday, the military said 4 soldiers had been killed. The updated figure of 9, all killed on Monday, followed notification of families. It has not been possible for journalists to independently verify casualty figures being issued during the conflict. Families of some of the hostages protested at the Kerem Shalom border crossing, stating that their aim was to prevent humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip. A US airstrike on a rocket launcher late on Monday foiled an attack on Ain al-Assad airbase, which hosts US and other international forces in western Iraq. The global shipping company, Hapag-Lloyd, has said it will continue to route cargo via the Cape of Good Hope, as it still considers the situation in the Red Sea dangerous. Stewart, that was a much more densely packed update. Was there anything there that stood out for you?
Quite frankly, it's they say the first casualty of war is the truth, and that's this in this conflict. It's not a war. Let's be honest. You need to have 2 sides being able to, have 2 armies to have a war. But the truth is, the Israeli government has lied constantly from the beginning about the whole conflict. I mean, some folk were pointing out on social media that, where was their army on the 7th of October for 7 hours when, the most fortified wall in the world, suddenly became breachable and atrocities were carried out within a 7-hour period. I just, the whole thing's just really murky, and we're not getting the truth, and I don't think we're getting the truth from, the only people we're getting the truth from is the journalists that managed to get in. But it's again a conflict that was avoidable. Hamas are another group that were created, by Israel like many other Western groups like Al-Qaeda and stuff like that, when it suited their purpose, and now they're coming back to bite them. So it's just a mess, and I don't, again, like the Ukrainian conflict, I just can't see an end to it. I think now that Israel's just used it for an excuse to ethnically cleanse.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I mean, I did the update on Sunday's Full Scottish and read out a list of figures, people killed in Gaza and the like, and then at the end it said these figures include the number of people that we just assume are buried under rubble. So who knows how high those figures are going to go by the time they've cleared the rubble and the likes. But I'll move on to the next item. The former Post Office Chief Executive, Paula Venables, has said she will hand back her CBE over the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of Post Office staff. After days of pressure, Venables issued a statement saying she was returning the award given to her in the 2019 New Year's Honours List with immediate effect. In her statement, she said that she was truly sorry for the devastation caused to the sub-postmasters and their families, whose lives were torn apart by being wrongly accused and wrongly prosecuted as a result of the Horizon accounting software system. The miscarriage of justice has been gaining attention since an ITV drama was broadcast, with more than 100 new potential victims of the Post Office scandal contacting lawyers after its airing. Only 93 of 900 convictions made over apparent accounting shortfalls have been overturned so far, while 2,417 settlements have been made under a scheme to compensate those who suffered personal injury, distress and inconvenience, harassment, loss of reputation and bankruptcy. Politicians are facing growing calls to help the remaining Politicians are facing growing calls to help the remaining post office operators whose convictions are unsafe. In Westminster today, Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, told MPs he was considering bringing a bill to Parliament to quash the remaining 800 convictions with a simple bill. Responding to a question from Nadeem Zahawi, the Conservative former Cabinet Minister, Chalk said, "The suggestion he made is receiving active consideration. I expect to be able to make further announcements shortly." The long-running inquiry into the Post Office scandal will soon begin its third year of hearings. Referring to the inquiry in her statement, Venables said she was focused on assisting the inquiry and will not make any further public comment until it has concluded. So, Stuart, I'm just wondering, did you manage to catch the ITV drama? Have you seen it?
No, I haven't yet. I spoke about this with my partner earlier, and she was explaining the background to it. It just seemed quite a shocking thing that it was actually able to happen, and the fact that they were able to get away with it so long by telling each individual that you know that there's no connection between this, there's not an overall arch due to the I was going to say poorly written software, but I don't know if that would do it justice.
Yeah, and I'm not going to ask you if you have any idea who gave her CBE, who nominated her. It was back in 2019. I'm sure we'll find that out soon enough when it comes to light. But what's been at the back of my mind, as this has been unfolding for years, is, do you think, would this have ever happened if the Post Office had never been nationalised by Margaret Thatcher? Is that when the rot started? It was to set in when the voice in my ear is telling me that that the Post Office is still owned by the government, that it's not been privatised. It's the Royal Mail. So it sounds like that kind of distinction between Network Rail and ScotRail is two different things, and I've gotten conflated. So again, apologies to you, Stuart. But when do you think
your point's still valid, though, regarding privatisation does not improve services. Certain things are private businesses, selling computers, selling cars. That is a legitimate private business. The Post Office was never and obviously it's not now Royal Mail, but Thatcher's privatisation drive, whether it was Royal Mail, well, it started with Thatcher, we're seeing the seeds of it now with the cost of living crisis through energy, where it's shareholders' benefits and company profits are put before folk being able to heat their homes. It's that brutal. I mean, it's almost like a modern Victorian era we're living in, and and people really, we've been anaesthetised by Thatcherism in a way, because she's basically made everybody reliable on mortgages for housing. And so folk are just too busy worrying about their mortgage and being able to have a house than actually protesting anymore. I think we've lost a lot.
So the voice in both their ears is telling us that the Royal Mail was privatised by David Cameron in 2000 and, did you say 2013? 2019? Yeah. 2013. So it seems that we can't quite pin the blame for this on Thatcher personally, but it sounds from what you're saying is that's when she started the ball rolling, and the Tories
basically, yes,
continued to go with it. So
yes.
Maybe we'll park that one there, and I'll try and be better informed the next time I'm talking to you, Stuart. I'll move on to the next item before I make any more car crash mistakes. The crucial pre-Christmas shopping period failed to be a gift for retailers as UK consumers reined in spending on presents, according to the latest surveys. The British Retail Consortium said spending was held back by weak consumer confidence. Total UK retail sales increased by 1.7% in December year on year against a growth of 6.9% in December 2022. These numbers are below the 3-month average growth of 2.3% and fall short of the 12-month average growth of 3.6%. The BRC said that volumes probably fell once inflation was accounted for. The festive period failed to make amends for a challenging year for sluggish retail sales growth as weak consumer confidence continued to hold back spending, the BRC Chief Executive Helen Dickinson said. Post-Christmas sales were unsuccessful in enticing spend in areas such as furniture and homeware, with households remaining cautious about making larger purchases. She said 2024 looks to be another challenging year for retailers and their customers, as spending will continue to be constrained by the high cost of living. Barclays said consumer card spending increased by 2.3% year on year in December, lower than November's growth of 2.9%, as retail spending failed to maintain the momentum it had built up in November through early seasonal discounts. It was lower than the current annual inflation rate of 3.9%, suggesting sales volumes fell. Spending on digital content and subscriptions, such as on-demand films or services such as Netflix and Apple TV Plus, rose by 11.6% during the festive period, as some streaming platforms increased their prices. Hospitality and leisure businesses will be encouraged by December's strong growth, particularly in the entertainment category, which saw growing demand for live shows, new films and TV series. Barclays head of retail, Karen Johnson, said clothing and department stores fell back into decline, down 2% and 0.2% respectively, after a rise in November. Stuart, it seems that at the heart of this story is the fact that last Christmas, people haven't been buying as much presents. They've been spending it more on themselves, having a good time, going out for a good night out, and the like. Does that figure with your experience last Christmas? It seems to me that all my friends and family, they've not been buying as many presents for each other, simply because they don't have as much cash to spare due to the cost of living crisis. But do you think also, is there another contributing factor post-pandemic? Are people beginning to realise that they just don't need as much stuff and some things are more important?
Yeah, I would like to think so. I would like to think there is lessons from the pandemic about what we really need in our lives. So that would be a good thing if it was. Obviously, I think probably the biggest driver of the drop is, folk having to heat themselves, pay for energy, keep their lights on. I do think that there's a huge that would be a huge part of it to be. Me personally, I've cancelled subscriptions to streaming services because the prices went up. Because they're asking you for more money for the same service. Or, they're asking you for more money for a lesser service. For example, Disney Plus. You can pay the same amount, but you get HD rather than 4K, for instance. So I feel, especially with Disney, is they're wanting the consumer to pay for their feature film failures, because I do think the superhero genre's running out of steam.
And yeah, those superheroes, they just keep coming at you, don't they? I was also wondering, we've been hearing a lot of talk, certainly from the Scottish Government, that they would like to transfer from an economy that rates itself and how well it's doing based on GDP and move towards one that's maybe more of a well-being economy. Do you think this might be a possible strand that might help down the line?
I would hope so. Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, there's a few independence groups like Believe in Scotland, the Common Weal, are looking at going down the well-being road. I think they need to define it and define how we get there. But even, I think they're looking at the Nordic countries, and the Nordic countries are just as capitalist. But the results of their capitalism gets ploughed back into their country. Whereas in this country, it gets siphoned off.
Siphoned off and ends up in private bank accounts in islands in the West Indies and the like. But thank you for that.
Yes.
I'll move on to the next item. EDF Energy is planning to extend the life of 4 UK nuclear power plants, including Torness in East Lothian. The French energy company, which manages the UK's 8 nuclear power stations, said it would make the final decision on whether to extend the life of the 4 plants with advanced gas-cooled reactors, or AGR, that's Torness Heysham 1 and 2 and Hartlepool, by the end of the year. The decision requires a regulatory approval. A spokesperson for EDF said approval would depend on plant inspections, adding the extensions would not be long but incremental. Last March, EDF extended lifetimes at Hartlepool and Heysham 1 by a further 2 years to March 2026. Heysham 2 and Torness power stations are now due to stay operational until March 2028. The French state-owned firm is also looking into running its Sizewell B plant on the Suffolk coast for 20 years longer than scheduled, until 2055. It is the UK's only pressurised water reactor plant and has a capacity of 1.2 gigawatts. A final decision will be taken next year. Mark Hartley, the managing director of EDF's nuclear operations business, said, "Looking ahead, our aim is to maintain the output of the 4 AGR stations for as long as possible and extend Sizewell B by a further 20 years out to 2055. EDF Energy, its UK arm, operates the 5 nuclear power stations that generate electricity. A further 3, Hunterston B, Hinkley Point B and Dungeness B, are defueling the first stage of decommissioning." So Stuart, I wonder if you feel the same way as I do when you hear about all of these already quite old nuclear power stations being kept into service and made to last even longer beyond the years they were expected to. How do you feel about that?
There's a political redefining of nuclear as green at the moment, which is quite disturbing when you think of radioactive waste and material. So that's quite disturbing. And I'm assuming, like everything else, when you run something beyond its recommended lifespan, you're increasing the risks of errors, breakdowns, the chance that things could go wrong. So it's quite frightening.
Yeah, and you said that nuclear is green, which the SNP or the Scottish Government certainly they've countered that. That's the message that we get from the Westminster Government, isn't it? But so energy. Speaking of which, energy is reserved to Westminster. It's devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly, but it's not devolved to Holyrood. Do you think if energy was devolved to Holyrood, then this would be less of an issue, and we'd be talking about more green projects like the pumped hydro storage that the SNP want to bring in, and the Greens.
Yeah, I do believe it would. I mean, unfortunately, the SNP's comments about using oil revenues for 10 years, it was a bit disconcerting. I don't know all the details and whether, decommissioning would take that long anyway, or sorry, the transition to green energy would take that long anyway. So I'd need to dig further into that one. But on the whole, yeah, if there's plenty of green energy in the world, whether it's wind power, wave power. I mean, if you live in Saudi Arabia or Morocco, you've got deserts that you could plaster with solar panels. So it's a case of it's capitalism against climate change, and capitalism doesn't, it's really finding it difficult to adjust if it's adjusting at all. There's a lot of talk of carbon offsets and stuff like that, but I find that that it's probably not going as far as we need it to.
Yeah, thanks, Stewart. You mentioned that nuclear is, well, also capitalism versus climate change is a great way of putting it. Just before I move on, I was just going to say that there's, I remember Philippa Whitford in Westminster last year giving a speech about pumped hydro storage being essential for maximising Scotland's renewable energy. And she said there are two spade-ready projects in Scotland already. One's the Cruachan Extension hydroelectric scheme, and the other one's the Core Glass hydro scheme at Loch Lochy. But I had another thought which has just dropped out of my head there a moment ago, which I was going to say about this. So again, yeah, maybe we should just move on. Is it going to come to me? Nope, it's gone. I'll move on to the next item so we can finish on time tonight and get you ready for your dinner. So 2023, this is a good link from the previous one if we're talking about, you mentioned capitalism versus climate change. So 2023 smashed the record for the hottest year by a huge margin, providing dramatic testimony of how much warmer and how much more dangerous today's climate is from the cooler one in which human civilization developed. The planet was 1.48 degrees centigrade hotter in 2023 compared with the period before the mass burning of fossil fuels ignited the climate crisis. The figure is very close to the 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature target set by countries in Paris in 2015, although the global temperature would need to be consistently above the 1.5 degrees centigrade for the target to be considered broken. Scientists at the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service, or the CCCS, said it was likely that the 1.5 degrees mark will be passed for the first time in the next 12 months. The average temperature in 2023 was 0.17 degrees higher than in 2016, the previous record year, marking a very large increase in climate terms. The primary causes of this increased global heating was continued record emissions of carbon dioxide, assisted by the return of the natural climate phenomenon El Niño. The high temperatures drove heat waves, floods and wildfires, damaging lives and livelihoods across the world. Analysis showed some extreme weather, such as heat waves in Europe and the US, would have been virtually impossible without human-caused global heating. Samantha Burgess, the CCCS Deputy Director, said, 2023 was an exceptional year, with climate records tumbling like dominoes. Temperatures during 2023 likely exceed those of any period in at least the last 100,000 years. The CCCS highlighted a number of remarkable events in 2023, including huge blazes in Canada that helped drive up global carbon emissions from wildfires by 30%, and unprecedented ocean temperatures that caused marine heatwaves to strike many regions. Antarctic sea ice also crashed to record lows, having previously experienced little obvious impact from global heating. So, Stuart, again, like me, you're probably remembering events last year from the news, like the fires in Rhodes. I know that we've been told that for us, if the planet is really going to stick to the Paris Agreement levels, then really it's going to have to be big international industries and conglomerates that are going to have to make the changes rather than just people like you and me. But I really do wonder, how bad do things have to get before people do start to make personal changes? Whenever I go to the supermarket, everybody is still buying plastic bags. Nobody seems to take any plastic bags with them. Everybody still seems to be taking their cars to work. How bad do you think it really does have to be before people, just on a day-to-day level, will start to sit up and take notice?
Well, I've never driven, so I'm not. That's me off the hook for that. I probably use too many plastic bags still, although we do recycle. The problem I find with climate change is they're talking about the end of the planet. It's not the end of the planet that's the issue. It's the end of the human race. If the planet would recover, and we saw that during the pandemic. You probably saw the shots yourself of wildlife coming back into towns, and deers and bears in America, wolves just walking down the street. So it's once the leaders of the world really, big business is the problem, as we know. Big business and the bigger countries in the world, America, China, India, Russia. There's, until those countries actually take it on board where we are, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but it doesn't look pretty. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look optimistic going forward, at least in the short term. Maybe we need, more natural disasters, wildfires and things like that before folk actually take notice of it. I don't know. I find it kind of really staggering that, the person, ordinary Joe on the street can work out how bad this is, but our leaders just put their fingers in their ears and, and just ignore it as if it's going to go away.
Thanks, Stuart. I think you probably put it best with the previous item when you said it was capitalism versus climate change. And if you don't mind, I think I'm going to use that down the line. But I'll always try and credit you for it. So the next item is Emmanuel Macron has appointed France's youngest prime minister in modern times. Gabriel Attal, as he seeks to reinvigorate a difficult second term as president and limit any possible gains for the far right in the forthcoming European elections in June. Attal, 34, who was serving as education minister, has been referred to as Baby Macron in terms of his ambition, strong media presence and centrist politics, and is considered the best known and most recognisable face of the close circle of young politicians around the president. During his 5 months defending a hard line on authority and secularism as education minister, including banning girls in state schools from wearing abayas and experimenting with introducing school uniform, Attal had shot up the opinion polls as the most popular minister in government. Macron wrote on X that he was counting on Attal's energy and engagement to restore the spirit of 2017, the year of Macron's first election, when he promised to revolutionise French politics. Since 2022, Macron's second term has been defined by turbulence in a divided parliament since losing his absolute majority in elections shortly after being re-elected president. Attal, who has also served as budget minister, became a household name as government spokesperson during the COVID pandemic and is regarded by some as a master of political communication. A calm forgive me, a calm, careful speaker who can sometimes be ferocious in political TV debates against the far right. He's known to believe that it is important to speak to people's hearts. He won support for speaking out about being bullied at school. Attal is also the first openly gay Prime Minister of France, and he's in a civil partnership with Stéphane Séjourne, a member of the European Parliament for Macron's Renaissance Party. So, Stuart, I don't know how closely you follow French politics, but my limited understanding is that Macron, who cannot stand again in the next election, is rattled by how well Marine Le Pen's far right-wing party is doing in France. He had a previous Prime Minister, Elizabeth Borne. She was only held post for 2 years, basically because she wasn't able to get people to rally round Macron's party and stop the turn to the far right. So now he's realised that he needs someone more charismatic. He hopes that this is going to be Attal. Do you think Attal is going to be able to fend off Le Pen at the next election?
Well, first things first. I think it's I'm a straight man, but I think it's good that France has its first openly gay prime minister. I think that from that point of view, that's a really good thing. I find a lot of politics these days, you're more governed by PR than policies, and especially centrist politics. I think it's all about presentation rather than substance these days, and it's quite disheartening. It's how you can appeal to the viewers and how authentic you come across, even though you may be utterly disingenuous, shall we say. And I think politics in Europe are certainly, we saw in the Dutch elections, they're certainly moving to the right at the moment, and I don't understand why. Maybe it's the same reasons we see it moving to the right in this country, where, it's immigrants is the problem, it's folk on, unemployment, disabled folk. I don't know whether these are the same reasons that France is moving that way. But I know France, I don't know much about French politics, but I know they've got a legacy history with Africans and Arabs from their colonial days. So I don't know if that's maybe driving Marine Le Pen stuff in France more than, say, it would in this country.
Yeah, I think apparently, so Macron's government lost its majority, and one of the things that the previous Prime Minister did, Elizabeth Borne, she brought in that notorious rise in the age of the pension, where she told the French that they were going to have to work until they were 67, which infuriated the socialist left wings. And it's also interesting that both Macron and Elizabeth Borne and Attal, they're all from the Parti Socialiste, and yet because they've lost their majority, they have to produce legislation that keeps the right wing happy in the parliament. So it's all kind of very up in the air, and I think people are just worried that the French are just going to say maybe we should give Le Pen a shot, and she's going to get in that way. But we should really move on to the next item. Sorry, I'm taking up too much of your time.
No problem.
It's true. A federal appeals court is expected to consider on Tuesday morning whether Donald Trump can be criminally prosecuted on federal charges over his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election because it involved actions related to his office that he undertook while still president. The decision that the appeals court in Washington reaches after the hearing and how long it takes to issue a ruling could carry profound consequences for the scheduled March trial. Trump appealed his federal election interference case last month after the trial judge rejected his effort to have the charges thrown out on the grounds that he was afforded absolute immunity from prosecution. The argument from Trump's lawyers advanced a sweeping interpretation of executive authority that contended all of his actions to reverse his election defeat in 2020 fell under the outer perimeter of his duties as president and were therefore protected. Trump's motion was swiftly rejected by the US District Judge Tanya Chutkan, who wrote in an opinion accompanying the ruling that neither the US Constitution nor the legal precedent supported such an extraordinary extension of post-presidential powers. Whatever immunities a sitting president may enjoy, the United States has only one chief executive at a time, and that position does not confer a lifelong get-out-of-jail-free pass, Chutkan wrote. Former presidents enjoy no special conditions on their federal criminal liability. Trump has made it no secret that his set strategy for all his impending cases is to delay, ideally beyond the 2024 election in November, in the hopes that winning re-election could enable him to potentially pardon himself or direct his Attorney General to drop the charges. Trump's lawyers are using the appeals process as a strategy to delay the case as long as possible. Last month, the US Supreme Court declined to hear the matter, remanding the case back to the DC Circuit and having the three-judge panel of Florence Pan, Michelle Childs and Karen Henderson issue its own decision first. In the interim, the case against Trump remains frozen. The decision has almost certainly slowed down Trump's federal election interference case. Even if the DC Circuit were to rule against Trump quickly, he can ask the full appeals court to rehear the case and then has 90 days to lodge his own appeal to the Supreme Court. So, Stewart, this is another complicated one. I don't know if you were able to see Donald Trump's remarks after the presidential immunity. Today, I think his lawyers set out the case that they were saying that even after he stopped being the President of the United States, his immunity carried on because he couldn't have done his job without that. And Trump was stood by, and then he spoke, and he was very calm, he was very collected, he was full of confidence, and even when he spoke, he didn't raise his voice and he said that it would open a Pandora's box to political prosecution after political prosecution. Sorry, this is his lawyer said this, and could lead to Biden being prosecuted. And I'm thinking maybe by extension then Clinton and Bush. Do you think could Trump's lawyers be right? Can the president of the United States be above the law?
Yeah, I think Trump likes to think so. but the man's an absolute dishonest, disingenuous narcissist. And I don't know every single president in American history, but he's certainly the worst in my lifetime. And that's quite something when you consider we've had Ronald Reagan and George Bush. But I was, when you were talking there about, I was wondering if the Supreme Court were going to eventually get involved. Because he basically, as far as I remember, he basically selected the Supreme Court. So I think, is that his end game, to get his case back to the Supreme Court? I very much think it would be, but whether they obviously rule in his favour ultimately, I don't know.
Yeah, looking at the footage of his lawyers today, and then Trump standing by when I said he was really calm and collected when he spoke, it looked as if they thought they'd finally managed to, I've got it, I'm now safe. This is the clincher. I'm in the clear. But the thing that I don't understand is that Trump was no longer the president of the United States when there was all those photographs of the boxes and boxes and boxes of documents at Mar-a-Lago, none of which was under lock and key. And he seems to think that he can claim immunity for that, even though he shouldn't have even had those documents. Sorry, Stuart, were you going to say something there? Or...
No, I was nodding in agreement with you. I just think he just thinks he's above the law. That's simple as that. He thinks he can do anything and get away with it because he is Donald Trump. I find it very hard to relate to people like that because whilst, like everyone else, I have an ego, I don't have an ego that kind of distorts everything into some kind of alternative reality, which is, I think, where he lives.
Yes, in an alternate universe. So, just an interesting thing that you said about he's clearly the worst president of the United States. That made me think, it seems in this country, in the UK anyway, every time we've had a recent prime minister, we think, well, surely he must be the worst or she must be the worst. And then they come along and it's debatable as to which one seems to be the worst, but I'm getting off topic. I'd better get back on topic. So the Scottish Government has announced today that it is seeking views on plans for legislation to end conversion practices which seek to change or suppress a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. The consultation presents detailed information on proposals for legislation in Scotland, setting out what the law would cover and how it would work in practice. The proposed legislation seeks to prevent and respond to harmful acts while protecting existing freedoms, including speech, religion and belief. Situations that could be covered by the proposed legislation, if carried out with the intention to change or suppress a person's sexual orientation or gender identity and which cause that person to harm, include therapy or counselling that requires a person to change or suppress on their same-sex attraction, prescribing medication to suppress a person's sex drive, repeatedly or continuously controlling a person's activities and appearance, repeatedly or continuously threatening or humiliating someone. So the Equalities Minister, Emma Roddick, said conversion practices which aim to change or suppress a person's sexual orientation or gender identity are damaging and destructive acts that violate people's human rights. Sadly, these practices still happen today, and they have absolutely no place in Scotland. In taking forward our commitment to ban conversion practices, she continued, we are leading the way in the UK and joining the growing list of countries acting to address this harm. So, Stewart, I don't mind saying that I'm a gay man, and so this is something that horrifies me. But I suppose my question to you in relation to this story, this is obviously going to be something that's going to get the right wing in Scotland very anxious, or even across the UK in the family party. Do you think there's a chance that this is going to be taken by the right wing and used to beat the Scottish Government in a similar way that they did with the GRA reforms earlier in the, last year?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, yes, I do think that's where it's going to, it will head. How the GRA, whatever acronym that it actually falls under, was hijacked was nothing short of disgraceful. It showed an utter lack of tolerance towards a section of our society. Whether you believe is irrelevant in some ways, they believe so. Basically, I mean, what was really disturbing for me was that it made criminals like Isla Bryson, I don't know their full name, made criminals like Isla Bryson poster people for GRR or GRA, whatever. I found that really disturbing and really hateful. So do I think they will go down that road again? Absolutely. We are, and this is going to seem unconnected to it, but I'm going to say it anyway. The British state will do anything to protect its interests in Scotland. And it doesn't care who falls down or who's hurt or who suffers from it. And this will just be another casualty of that as far as I can see.
Yes, I mean, to me, I find it shocking that it does still happen. I personally haven't heard of anybody who's had to go through it or been sent to go through it. This is going to make it sound as if I'm being glib about the subject, and I'm really not. But I've got fond memories of a RuPaul movie where she played the headmistress or headmaster of a private school that was there to carry out conversion therapy, and people would send their young daughters and sons, lesbian and gay men, in the hope that they would change and become straight. But it turned out it was a comedy of having RuPaul, obviously, and the premise was that the last place that you should send your gay or homosexual sons or daughters is to a place that's full of other lesbians and gays. There was a gardener. It was a big house set in its own grounds, and there was a gardener who was constantly mowing the lawn and trimming bushes, and he was always topless and was built like a bodybuilder. And so I would just recommend it. I can't remember the movie's name. But yeah, I would recommend it. It's good fun. But let's hope. Sorry?
I just rewatched The Crying Game the other night, funnily enough, before I come on. Yeah. And I it's a fantastic piece of cinema with a fantastic script, with wonderful performances. I thoroughly enjoyed it again. But after it was over, I just felt really sad about a film from 1992 shows how less tolerant our society is in 2023. I found that really, really sad. That I think we've went backwards in some ways since then, all for political reasons, all to. Well, I said I did generally think it's to protect the union. I utterly believe that.
Yeah, sadly, I think you're probably right, Stuart. It looks like we're going to have a wee bit spare time if there's anything that you might want to come back to later on, because this is our final story, or our final item. The construction has begun on a new applied shipbuilding academy at BAE Systems Scotstoun Yard on the banks of the River Clyde in Glasgow. The academy will comprise a modern trade hall and a flexible learning hub. The academy will support the development of the entire workforce, from apprentices to senior leaders, and forms part of the company's ongoing commitment to develop future talent. It will accelerate the modernisation of Glasgow's historic shipbuilding industry, upskilling the existing workforce while attracting new talent to secure its future for generations to come. A historic industrial building will be retrofitted to become the modern trade hall, with areas dedicated to each shipbuilding trade, ship-realistic mock-up environments, and research and technology facilities. Immediately adjacent to the flexible learning hub, containing more than 30 classrooms, a STEM innovation lab and office facilities will be there. On completion in the second half of 2024, the Shipbuilding Academy will provide bespoke training for almost 4,500 employees, including nearly 700 apprentices. These new facilities will also enable a substantial expansion of the successful early years programme at BAE Systems, doubling the intake in Glasgow to more than 200 new apprentices each year. Construction of a modern shipbuilding hall in Govan is also underway, and together with a range of additional investments in technologies and equipment, it forms part of an overall £300 million investment in the two sites in Glasgow over the next 5 years. So, Stuart, we try wherever possible to finish every show on a good news story about Scotland. So, would you agree that this fits the bill in that sense?
How to say this without putting the kibosh on your good news story? It would be more wonderful if it was civilian shipbuilding. That's my thoughts on it. You know, BAE Systems is a company that at the moment is profiting from the wars in Ukraine and profiting from the war in Israel, along with Raytheon and many other companies. I think I'm not a. It's good. I mean, obviously, I don't want 4,500 folk to be out of work tomorrow, but it would be good if we had a long-term plan to get back to civilian shipbuilding, whilst acknowledging that the technologies that they're learning and putting forward just now could be adapted to that. So I apologise if I'm putting the kibosh on your good news story.
No, it's all fair comment. I was thinking, I don't actually disagree with you about BAE being a private company. Are you saying that you would rather have just like the old shipyards brought back? Have I misunderstood you?
I remember. Yeah, I'd rather the bill. Yes, in a way, yes. I mean, I remember many years ago when I stayed in Glasgow, I applied to Yarrows, if anybody out there still remembers that company, for an apprentice draftsman job, which I didn't get, but never mind. But no, yes, civilian shit. We were talking about war earlier in Ukraine and Israel and Gaza, and I find it very hard that this country supplies technology, weapons that are used to kill people, you know, especially in Gaza more than anywhere, because they don't have an army. They're defenseless for the most part. So I never feel comfortable with that. If we could use the technology and the the skills we have for, like you said, a return to shipbuilding. Not the, I mean, we can't go back to the old Clydeside because it was grimy, dirty, and not the most pleasant working environment. But modern shipyards producing modern commercial ships, be it liners, be it tugs, be it anything. I would just prefer. It's very hard for me to sit here and be happy that folk are being trained and encouraged to come up with new ideas, possibly to kill folk. I mean, I could be totally misrepresenting what they're going to be trained in if it's just the technology side, but that's my initial impression of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Certainly, you're right about you're certainly right about Scotland's shipbuilding heritage. I remember I used to go up as a lad. I would go up to the top of Park Circus and look out across Kelvin Grove Art Gallery Museum, and beyond you could see not one Finiston cran, but there was like rows of them, and they've all gone. But there was two other things in Glasgow that, well, not in Glasgow, two other things that this kind of chimed with me when I read this story. The Glasgow City College used to be known as the Naval College, the old Naval College. I don't know if you know it, down on the Clyde side. Yeah. And that was founded in 1910 and it became part of Glasgow College in 2010. It's one of the few colleges in Scotland to offer courses in nautical students who want to join the merchant navy. And it's got state-of-the-art facilities. So it sounds like that'll be quite a nice complement. Well, if it turns out not to be just military. But there's also... Are we going to need... people going through their studies, but because we're hoping to get the ferry restored between Rosyth and Zeebrugge, aren't we? Fiona Hislop's been urged to re-establish a direct link between Europe and Scotland, and we'll need things like that come independence. Do you think is this maybe part of the jigsaw, or am I being naive?
I think it's part of the unionist jigsaw, so they can promise frigates and say, the amount of frigates that keeps changing, as we know, were promised whatever, then it's changed to this, and then you've got loads of folk out there trying to defend, and this sleight of hand that we're seeing over numbers. So I do think that it's part of that strategy, but I do agree that, and if we are, there's nothing to stop us encouraging building infrastructure just now for in an independent country, like you're restoring links to the continent for ferries and stuff like that. I mean, as far as and it would also, I think part of the reason that the UK government doesn't want us to do that is because it's going to sound like conspiracy theory land here, but I don't care. I think it's actually true. Scottish exports, I mean, we don't really know how many exports go down to England to be re-exported from Hull or wherever. I'd love to see a Scottish container terminal. So I mean, for a couple of reasons. One, it would be more environmentally friendly. So,
Carry on, Stewart.
Yeah, so I'd like to see that. That would be a great thing, but we could also do more, I think, to prepare. And it would benefit Scotland now within the Union.
Yes. So, Stuart, we've got a minute left. If there's anything that... Okay, forgive us, viewers, but we've got the voice in our ear is telling us that basically what this is going to do is help deliver new green vessels, worldwide. Well, I think we've used up our last minute now, Stuart. But
not a problem.
Apologies to viewers that are sort of listening to Dead Space. Stuart, thank you. Incredibly brave of you to join us with hardly any warning at all. But we are hugely grateful, and I hope that you'd be happy to come back on again sometime.
I'd be delighted to, because then I can learn to do it better.
Oh, listen, tell me about it. I can totally relate to that. But anyway, so that's it for this evening. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We now urgently need to raise at least £10,000 to pay our bills within the next 7 days. We have already raised almost £2,000 thanks to your generosity. However, we do need to raise the remaining £8,000 immediately if we are to be able to pay our bills and continue making programmes like this. We really cannot stress that any more strongly. It's getting urgent here. So please do donate whatever you can afford. And good night, and thank you for watching.